Good morning, everybody. It's 11 o'clock. We would like to be on time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the 19th Annual South African Employment Report. This time around, a webinar. Usually we were in a physical venue, but today we're doing it virtually. A hearty welcome to all that have taken the time to join us this morning. My name is Jacques Higu, and I will be the facilitator of today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, UASA is a future-focused organization. We strongly believe that we can shape the future we want for our members and their organization by using the information we have available to us today. To predict, plan, and ultimately prepare the ever-changing world of work. The South African Employment Report, since its inception, has been very instrumental in providing well-researched, accurate and reliable information regarding the South African economy and jobs and what the future holds. Now more than ever, as the world is battling through difficult and uncertain times, we are not only required to make informed decisions, but also to use this information to make sure organizations such as ours do survive during the challenges that we've got. Before I hand over to Mike, our award-winning presenter, I would like to take a moment to establish a few house rules and how this webinar is going to be conducted. All participants to the webinar must be muted to allow the presenter to speak without disturbances or distractions. If you have any questions, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and submit your question. We will try and answer all of the questions and as much of them as possibly can. All the questions not answered will be summarized and the responses will be distributed via email at the end of the event. I urge all of you to respect the presenter's views and be polite at all times in our engagements. With that out of the way, allow me to hand over to Mike Schussler, a world-renowned and award-winning economist who has won the Economist of the Year twice already. He will be presenting UASA's 19th Annual South African Employment Report titled COVID-19, the Future of Jobs and the Economy. Welcome to everybody, and without any further ado, can I hand over to Mike. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. We're going to be looking at the world economy, the South African economy, a few factors of the South African economy. For example, we're going to be looking at the budget deficit. But the second half of our presentation is going to be very much about employment. UASA is a union. They want to know what employment prospects are there for their members. And we're going to look a little bit at the future of work. It's very difficult, but we do see a lot of changes happening now with the COVID situation. But my big focus, I think, is more the employment and the unemployment situation and into the future, because I think that's a very, very important aspect. All the other things will lead into there. And I'm going to, without further ado, start the presentation. Our young technical guy here, Rudolf, is just putting it on screen for us. And I hope you can all follow. We are going to be hopefully going forward, and we're looking at the world economy forecasts. And as I've said, we can look at the unemployment situation, and we forgot that a bit in the lockdown, and I'll show you why. I think we're going to go on to the first proper slide, which is now what the forecasts are for the world economy. And while we are at it, I think we're all a little bit muddled. All the economists, our models aren't meant to work when you have lockdowns, pandemics, load shedding, and so on. Our models are much simpler and cannot take all these things into account. So you have quite a wide range of outcomes here. But if you look at an average of that, the world economy is going to decline with about 5.2%, and next year will increase with 4.2%. And those are the numbers I've used just to show you how the world economy will look like. And if you look at the red bars on the right-hand side, you'll see that the world economy is only going to get back to over its 2019 levels in 2022. And some of these forecasts might still be optimistic, but nonetheless, that's more or less when the world economy comes back. But as the world's population grows with around 1.1% a year, the per capita income for the world economy only comes back in 2023. So that gives you an idea that people are going to be poorer than they were last year for a minimum of about 3 years. If we look at the Economist poll of forecasters at the back of the Economist magazine every week, you get this, and this is the one for last week. So this will give you a clear indication of what people think, where the pain is going to be. So if you look, Peru, Spain, Argentina, France, India, South Africa, Chile are places that have had a very severe lockdowns. And so same with Brazil. The less severe lockdowns, ironically enough, were actually in China. Only half the Chinese economy locked down, and only for a certain period. They now have dancing in the dark and disco parties again in Wuhan, where this crisis started. And you can see Pakistan had a very shallow 3-week slowdown or lockdown, and then decided that they could not afford it because of their unemployment numbers and the poverty situation. So we can see here that quite a number of countries are going to see very big declines, including South Africa. If we look at the data so far in, except for South Africa's second quarter, you can see some of the countries came in with a very weak situation already. And I think particularly of the oil exporters, the commodity exporters, so the Norways and Saudi Arabia, and obviously Chile and South Africa there too. The commodity prices weren't so great. There was already a bit of a slowdown in world trade because of the situation of the trade wars between the US and China. And if we look at the second quarter, you can see a lot of the data that's come in on a year-ago basis, how deep those recessions are. The reason I'm doing a year-on-year basis is because some of the countries only have non-seasonally adjusted GDP numbers, so it only makes sense to compare across on a yearly basis. And you can see South Africa, I believe, will be one of the worst affected, with about 19% down on a year ago. And you can again see that, strangely enough, China is in positive territory already again, and Vietnam has remained there. Taiwan is slightly down. They've also been impacted, obviously, but they never locked down. South Korea, you say, is a much less of an impact of a lockdown. And you can see what the impacts is. And the Norwegians, the Finns, the Sweden and Denmark, all of them didn't lock down quite as harshly as, for example, Britain, Belgium, Chile, or Peru did. So you can see the impact of a lockdown here, quite frankly, is at least going to double your decline, I would say. I think I've said all of this, and I think you've got to remember mine for the second quarter is a forecast at the moment, but nonetheless, I think it won't go too far from that. We are in this moment in time seeing various industries really, really disrupted. World trade declined with about 6.5%. It wasn't as bad as 2009, strangely. But if you look at things like car sales, they were already under pressure. Never in my life have I seen world car sales down over 30% on a volume basis around the world. It is really, really big. And we're looking at air freight all around the world that really got hit very hard. Air freight also relies on passenger transport. Passenger transport virtually came to a halt in the air, but that gives you a very good idea as to what's happening. And if you think of air freight is 1% of the world trade by volume, but it's about 30% of the world's trade by value. So the container throughput is one thing, but if you think of it in a ship's container, it's unlikely you'll find things such as cell phones and high-end value products. You're going to find that in air freight.
Mike, just before we move on, thank you so much. We've got a question from Davy Ruud that says, what is your annualized Q2 GDP?
It's around minus 52, 53%, Darwin.
Thank you, Mike.
Then if we look at manufacturing and the workplace closure index as done by Oxford University, just to show you that South Africa was one of the places on the planet that had a very big closed quarter, if you wish. Our manufacturing lost nearly 33%. Only Peru and India lost more of their manufacturing. And we were one of only 4 countries in the back of the Economist magazine that saw a manufacturing decline of over 30% in the second quarter on a year-ago basis again. So you can see all these other countries have all had declines, with the exception of Taiwan in manufacturing. But those with harsher lockdowns are generally over 20%, whereas those with milder lockdowns are below 20%. The PMI, the positive news starting to come through is that the PMIs have all turned, or mostly turned positive. My only question is, they're positive, but what is the base? The base is very, very negative at the moment. So it's okay if you're growing again, but as we all know, you can decline with 50%, so 100 goes to 50. If you increase with 50%, again, you only get to 75. But here the question is, what sort of base did this have? And I think world manufacturing is going to take a while to get back. The supply chains are broken. We only need to look at South Africa or Southern Africa to see how long it takes a truck to go from Putu Harbour, say, to Lusaka. Can take in excess of a month at the moment because of all the border stoppages. It is really a painful experience as well because the truck drivers have to do so many COVID tests. So the whole system is broken. And if you look at the latest Transnet port data, you'll see that it's down from the month before for July. So again, the supply chain is still not fixed. But we can just have a look at 2 commodities quickly. Brent is the sort of thing I think is going to happen with the world economy. It had a bit of a V-shaped recovery, which could be expected, but now that recovery has got a long tail to get back to the sort of January levels, or even maybe December levels that it needs to be to have called that a full recovery. So it is still, about halfway or 2/3 of the way up, but it's not yet fully recovered. Whereas copper looks very different. I'm not quite sure exactly why, but they call copper Dr. Copper with a PhD in economics. But also now the V-shape seems to be over there, and it is sort of hesitant going forward. And I think that has to do with ultimately the uncertainty of the situation in the world economy. I'm going to talk a bit about the South African economy. This is just my judgment of where our GDP per capita will be. I'm using the per capita forecasts that we have from the UN. And you can see in the second quarter of this year, it's very likely that our GDP per capita will drop back to levels that we last saw in 2002. And just to put that into context, those years we were just coming back up after many years of declining per capita income. And this takes us back in per capita terms to less, we'll be less rich than we were in 1975 right through to 1990. So that's going to change a lot of things in our economy. And the per capita part of the South African economy is going to take the longest to get back. Our highest level of per capita income was in 2014. To get back to those levels now is no longer just a decade situation. It is probably over a decade, between 11 and 14 years. If we assume a little bit of electricity outages next year and the year after, I think we've got a long road back there, and very much a slow decline after probably a bit of a bounce or a V shape in the beginning of it, even in per capita terms. But we are going to see people shift their spending. Durable items such as cars, houses, furniture especially will be hit You'll see smaller cars, smaller furniture, all those sort of things will be coming into it. Unfortunately, also, it means that your sort of sit-down restaurant meals are probably going to be less, or people are going to have to offer specials, fast food instead of sit-down, barbers instead of hairdressers. Those are the sort of things I think that will be happening. If we take just a very quick look at retail, I'm not a retail analyst here, but you can see if you look at 3 years ago, how the last quarter fared, you can see restaurants down nearly 90%, takeaways down about 63%, and you can see the cars, because I include that now here, at 45% down on what it was, and fuel sales down 40%. So it's been right through, and even pharmacies, which you would have expected in this crisis, have seen a decline. So it's been right through the thing, and this at a time when the UIF has been paying out TERS of over 40 billion rand, a 9 billion rand extra in SAER fees. So you would have expected the general dealers, the pharmacies, even the hardware and clothing to not have seen as much of a decline. And partly that is consumer confidence, partly it's people losing income. So there is certainly something, and you can see our own car story is a little bit worse than the car fall of about worldwide of about 31%. Our drop was right up to about 44%. The electricity generated right through to the accommodation sector, seasonally adjusted and annualized, RV, just for you. You can see in some cases a decimation of industry, construction, nothing left virtually of construction, accommodation, restaurants, quick service, construction plans. So if you look at that quarter on quarter seasonally adjusted, I mean, we were looking at economists saying, well, the decline could be as high as 40%. Now, all the economists that I know, including you, Darby, are looking at over 40% declines on an annualized basis for the second quarter. So that's a very big difference we've seen. Just from the BankServe side, we've seen part of that bounce back, and we're going to see that in the coincident indicator, and I'm very certain that we are going to get, let's put it this way, halfway back at least, if not 80% back. The problem is that last 20% is going to take a long, long time for that comeback to happen. And that last 20% is very important for the profitability of many sectors, many firms, because your profit margins in the economy are less than 6%. That is, if you analyze the firm data that the Stats SA gives you. So if you've got that low profitability, it's very difficult to see 80% being a good hold. But I think many people will already feel a lot of relief, a lot of increase in things. And we're looking a lot better. Just to check on reality, this is the cash flow of South African businesses. So it's just income minus expenditure. It leaves out depreciation, buying and selling of assets. And you can see that even after inflation in the first quarter, it was still 4.1%, which means that if you assume that the business owner pays themselves, they are still actually, at the end of the day, going to want to be in business. So I don't think businesses are going to just close wholesale, but what I do think is this number is going to get a lot weaker, and once it gets to, say, a 1% sort of level, there'll be a lot more businesses giving up, and I hope we don't get there, but this gives you a little bit of an idea of what is happening. And this is a little bit seasonally, not seasonally adjusted, but it is smoothed on a 4-quarter average, but it does give you an idea of the operations of business. But this was all before the second quarter, and one can expect the second quarter to drop below the 0 level.
Mike, just before we move on, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for those individuals that are commenting and asking questions on our Q&A platform. Mike, just quickly, Darby agrees with your assumptions in terms of the GDP. Helmo has however got a question with regards to when do you think the TERS payments will be sorted out, as some people are still waiting for payments from April?
We'll talk about the TERS just now, Helmo, but the long and the short is I don't know when it will be sorted, but we'll talk about where we are. When we went into this thing, business confidence was already low in South Africa. It dropped even further in the second quarter. And the main thing about business confidence in South Africa, the main negative thing, is that businesses don't believe that our politics and our political climate is a constraint for growth. And this is something that says to me, we don't always need money to fix things. We need to use our political capital. And we need to ask our politicians to use that political capital to make things happen. So that's where we are. The fact of the matter is that's where it takes me, what's happening with the government. Darby's far more an expert on this, but I'll try. The fact of the matter is that our government cannot stop spending. If we look at the red line, the non-interest expenditure, that might not be that up, but we're still not covering that with tax money. The total government expenditure is up quite significantly. But on the right-hand side, you'll see a government expenditure portrayed between big emerging markets, and South Africa. And South Africa is one of those emerging markets and a big emerging market. So we're part of this. And you can see that all emerging markets were spending around 25–26% of GDP back in 2004. Everyone increased to 2012, probably partly due to the big financial crisis there. But then we really started pulling away from everybody. So by 2019, our total government expenditure, and that is not just the expenditure of national and provincial, but includes local government, we'd gone up to 35%. And that's a huge amount of money in any terms. And we're one of those that have pulled up all those in the last while, but we've really run ahead. And we were already ahead in 2012. So our problem is that we've basically gone from 25% to 35% in a matter of 15 years of government spending as a percentage of GDP. And that is not sustainable by any standards of an emerging market. At the moment, we're looking at tax income being about 50 billion rand short of the expenditure every month. This will increase to around 70 billion a month. It's not what I'm saying, it's what government has actually said, that it's going to be about 710 billion shortage this year. And seeing that the beginning of the shortages are a little less, I also think that we're looking at even more than that, than the 710 billion, that is, shortage. So we could go even up to 80 billion rand a month shortfall at some stage in the next little while. This is a moving 3-month average, and it will be interesting to watch the end of the month figures come through. We can look here at our budget deficit, budget balance. You can see it is for our democracy period, and even before, it is at an all-time whole high. You know, it's really at levels we've never seen before. And that takes our GDP, debt to GDP up, and you can see how we compare to other emerging markets. We were better off than most other emerging markets. And then in 2009, we started spending, as did others, but we never continued or we never slowed that extra spending growth down so much. And we just continued rising with this. And that's the problem that we have. We've really, everybody says if government can just spend a bit more, well, government has been spending a bit more all the time, and yet things haven't improved. And when we compare to our peers, we haven't created the jobs, we haven't created the growth. So that's something that we need to sort out. At the moment, the forecasts from the Economist magazine is that South Africa will have a GDP shortage, a deficit to GDP of 16%. I've seen other economists talking of 16.6%. So we're pretty much there. I don't think it's going to come down to 9% overnight. I think we're looking at 11% and 9% the next 2 years. But even government says it's going to be quite big. So I really do not know how to say it in any other terms, but we are going to see government debt to GDP reach 100% of GDP. There's no doubt about it in my mind by 2024.
Mike, thank you. We've got another question, ladies and gentlemen, from Helmo. I'm expecting a record 120 billion fiscal deficit in July. Mike, what is your forecast?
Helmo, I don't have one for July at this moment in time. It's not my speciality. You can ask Darby. If you look at what the government is saying to us, they're saying they're going to keep this active scenario and they're going to bring down the budget deficit. But as other economists have pointed out, this is very difficult to do. And it will in itself stop a lot of aspects of growth. But we will have to relook at this whole situation as we go forward. But the point that I'm trying to make is 100% of GDP is not the top. The top could be a lot higher than that, and even government is acknowledging that. And I think we've had experience now in the last few years. Every time government says, oh no, in 2 years' time we'll turn this whole thing around, it never turned around. So this is the situation that South Africa is in. The trust that rating agencies and other players had in the ability to manage our deficits and our debt burden from the government side has certainly waned a lot.
Mike, just before we move on, another question, ladies and gentlemen, from our Q&A session screen is, Mike, and this question is from Gerard. He says, how will government recover the shortfall other than taxes on employees?
Well, the one thing that the government is doing now is they're lending money wherever they get it from the IMF and so on, but that still means we either have to cut back on spending or increase taxation. We're hoping, from my side of the political argument, if you wish, that more of that will fall on the spending side because we have a very, very big government expenditure problem. It will be politically difficult. It will be a massive, massive problem to push through. Government is already probably in breach of some of the commitments they've made to trade unions in their bargaining council. And those negotiations for next year are going to be very, very tough. There's no doubt about that. But the other thing is South Africa is already a top 10 tax to GDP burden country in the world. It is the whole Southern Africa region has a very big tax burden, whether it's Namibia, all the SACU countries are in the top 20 tax countries in the world at the moment. And yes, you can argue that the Scandinavians, or some of them are higher, not all, but they get a lot more back. And in the long run, you've got to make this happen. So I think we're coming to a T-junction in the road. We're actually already there. We've passed the T-junction. We have to make a U-turn and decide which way to go. And that's where we are. It's the clock is past midnight. And it's not because we passed a certain threshold in our debt or a threshold in our spending. It's just the time has now overtaken the whole thing, and COVID has just made the whole thing worse. We had to spend a bit more in COVID, there's no doubt. We had to use our UIF funds, there's no doubt. I've got no problem with us using it in the short term. I'm just not sure if we're using it for the right things, and I'm also not sure how we're going to pull it back if we have far less businesses and far less ability to pay taxes. Then I think we're going to sit with an overhang of state jobs that we cannot afford. And that's going to be a problem in an environment where jobs are already very limited. I'm going to move on now into the employment and jobs, and I'm just going to ask that you just bear with me for the first couple of slides here. I'm going to give you a background. So the first slide here is most of these countries are at the back of the Economist again. So they're the big economies of the world. In fact, all of them are. These are all for the first quarter of this year. And you can see South Africa had the highest unemployment rate in the first quarter of this year. And that's what we entered the COVID situation with. All our neighbors are in the worst 12 unemployment countries in the world as well. I'm talking Namibia, talking Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, Mozambique, We don't have accurate figures for Zimbabwe, and you can even put Zambia in there as well. So Southern Africa is the region in the world with the highest tax to GDP and the highest unemployment rates and the highest inequality rates. It is really a big problem. So when we look at this first quarter GDP and we look at all the other big countries, not all the countries in the world, just the big economies, we had double the rate, double the unemployment rate of the next nearest, and that was Greece. They were at some stage a decade ago in a crisis. They addressed it. It's taken them a decade to go from 27 to 14.5. They've now increased it again with COVID. It's gone to about 17.5, I know. But what I'm trying to say is ultimately we went into this in the weakest possible position. When Greece was at 27%, people were saying this is a crisis situation, this is sort of depression-style unemployment rates. Then I wonder what South Africa is, because we've been over 27% and over 25% for a decade virtually. We've been over 20% for more than 2.5 decades. And if we take that in the background and we look at what's happened in other countries with the unemployment rates during COVID. So what I've got here is only the countries that have given us new figures for the second quarter, full second quarter, that's why Greece is not here. You get a very clear picture of what's going on. Strangely enough, the Thailand and New Zealand and Indonesia, Italy actually saw declines, but that's because it depends on how you structured your help, and that meant that some firms actually hired more people because the government was paying them more. But it's not going to last. But you can see the majority of countries by far had higher unemployment rates, and the Philippines and Peru and Colombia were locked down very harshly, and you can see they all went into double figures here with their increases in unemployment. So where they had an unemployment rate of maybe 10%, for the Philippines it's now 23% as an example. That's what I'm talking about. So we really had we really got our work cut out for us. We should have had our unemployment numbers by now. Stats SA has changed the way that they are doing it because of COVID partly, but they're moving it to a computer and phone system. I think it's taking them a bit of time to adjust there. But if you think about it, well over 40 billion was paid out from the UIF. SASSA was paying out an extra 9 billion. I'll give you some of the figures that this is all about. But if you just take it in the years running up to this, in 1995, our unemployment rate was around 17%. Now it's virtually doubled to 30%. This is not a good situation that we should have done. And you can see unemployment rate was already picking up steam. But virtually there has not been 1 year after 1995 where our unemployment rate was below 20%. There just has not been. And there's been no time period in the last 10 years when we were under 22.5%. So this is a crisis. There is no country in the world, none, that had an unemployment rate of 20% or more for more than 2 decades. There just isn't. This is depression-style unemployment. To talk about it in any other factor is making a mistake. We've got nearly 11 million adults unemployed. The numbers you saw now were the official definition. We all learn that economics has certain pillars, and employment is one of them. That employment, I think, is very, very close to depression, or is a depression, because the US during the Great Depression went to a 25% unemployment rate in 1932. And that's one of the reasons that the Fed has that balance between employment and inflation in their whole outlook. And that was called depression-style unemployment. We are at 30%. We have depression-style unemployment rates. And on top of that, in the last while, we've seen that number start to increase. We have gone from 9.7 to 10.8 million. In January 2019, we put down a minimum wage. I'm not saying it's just the minimum wage, but we saw 150,000 job losses up to the first quarter of this year. A lot more people entering the labour market, and all of a sudden, in 1 year, we added 1.1 million jobs. This is the first year as well, the first time that we've had 5 quarters in a row of job losses or increased unemployment, let's put it that way, since we've been doing the data quarterly. So on the job side, it is really looking grim. And it is not just me that says so, but NIDS has said about 3 million people have lost their work. TERS says to us 9.1 million payments were made in less than 4 months. So assuming those are formal sector people that at least partly are not getting their work done, it is really a situation whereby we're looking at about 3 million people. The National Employers Association of South Africa indicates that still about 20% of employers have not been paid for April, and the amounts are higher in the later months. We've now had that stop, as Alma pointed out. We don't know when it's going to get going. It is a huge problem. People are waiting for that money, and it's maybe not that much, but for a lot of people, 3,500, 4,500 rand will make all the difference. And remember that some employers have been saved by having that cost reduction. Once it's not there and they cannot pay anymore, then I think the full extent of this unemployment situation will become clearer in the 3rd and the 4th quarter. I take the SASA figures with a pinch of salt, but they did say that they've received over 7 million applications by the mid last week, and that they've paid 4 million of those applications for unemployment relief. Now that would be sort of the self-employed and the informal and the commission earners and so on. So ultimately, you know, these are the people that have to rely on SASA, and that payment is only 350 rand. But if you think about the type of person that we're looking at, I have been reading a lot and I've talked to a lot of people, but I'm telling you, from car guards who depend on people giving them money, to lawyers who've seen their incomes decline, journalists have seen their incomes decline, people flying for Mango Airlines are doing so at 5,000 rand a month, nurses are getting 30% salary cuts, working only a third of the time, so where they used to earn about 14,000, 15,000 rand a month, they're earning literally the minimum wage of 3,500 rand a month. This thing is right through the economy. This is really, really harsh, and we have virtually run out of ammunition to help here. So we have no choice but to open up the economy and realize what we've got. Here's just a breakdown of where the TERS has been paid. These are payments, so you have to divide the top one probably with about 2.5, so that's about 1 million, because the restaurants are still being paid, whereas the advertisers could go back. The broader trade industry, 2.2 million payments, so there's another 1 million people there. And then the building industry at 500,000, the manufacturing, professional services and so on, also large numbers, and that all ended up being 9.1 million payments being made until about the 15th or so of August. So that's from the end of April to the 15th of August. That's just over 3 months or so. That gives you a very good idea. And we know that that hasn't been everybody. So we're probably looking at something that should have been about 11 million payments, representing roughly 3.5 million people. Other indicators of why I think the jobs have declined. If we look at the passenger numbers, they've been decimated. Rail has fallen off a cliff, where they used to have 55 million journeys every month. In June, it was 140,000. So you've gone from 55 million to 140,000. Buses are running at about a third of capacity. And you can see from last year, this time, there was already a bit of a decline, but we were at 40 million and we've gone to about 11 million. That means if you assume it's a monthly ticket in all these cases, that means there's about 830,000 less people using public transport. The TomTom figures I checked this morning again, we're still very low. We're missing about 40% of the cars on the road. But overall, in the second quarter, it was well above 60%, and about a week ago we were at 50%. As the schools come back, there was a bit of an increase there as well. Now, some of those people are working from home, but it's very unlikely that somebody using public transport on a train is able to work from home. And it's very unlikely the same for the buses. And in the taxi ranks, in some of the places, it's now sort of semi-normalized. From the West Rand to town, apparently it's pretty normal. But from the Soweto and from Diepsloot, we're talking where people used to wait at the terminals up to 20 minutes for a taxi. They now get to queues that are 4 people deep. So it's very little people. The taxi has to wait for people to fill up, which says to you that a lot of people using taxis are no longer at work. And that may be that some of them can work at home, but I think the vast majority and some. But I think we're looking at a very big number here in public transport overall. Where do I think the unemployment is going to be? And I think that's the crux of my thing. I think we're probably looking at about 40%, 41% by March next year, because unemployment is a lagging indicator. It takes a while to all the unemployment and employment stuff to go through and become more stable. I think we will see a decline from there again, or an improvement, let's put it that way, in the unemployment rate in the next 15 months, but I'm not sure if we'll go back to 30%. I think we'll probably go back to 33 or 34%, or maybe 35%, but that's where we're going to be. And I think it is needed to say we don't know everything. We don't have all the hard numbers yet. And even if we had some of the hard numbers, it's still going to be a wide range of forecasts. So if I take a 1.3 million people losing their jobs, and just the job entrance into the next year, then I look at 36% unemployment, which is also huge. And if I get to 3.3 million jobs, which is not really the worst case scenario if you really think about it, but it'll end up being closer to 45%. But we've obviously got to compare where we are on the unofficial or the official employment numbers of 30%. People like calling the other one the unofficial numbers, but it's just the expanded unemployment rate. So I include people, or we all include people who haven't been looking for a job, but they're still able to go and get a job. They can start in the next week, which is one of the things that brings this number down slightly. But there we go to about 50% number, 49.7. That's my estimate. That's about a 2.9 million increase. And just to put things into perspective, if we go back to 1995, we had, on the expanded unemployment rate, we had 3.3 million people unemployed. We then went all the way up to about 5-6 million in 2008. And now we're at 10.8 million, or nearly 11 million. So that is a huge increase in 25 years, from 3.3 million to 10.8 million unemployed on the expanded forecast. It's over 300% increase there. And I think if we get this other increase here with another 2.9, it basically becomes 4 times the number that we had in 1995. It is really shocking. It numbs your mind if you think about it. And we may become the first country in the history of the world to go over a 50% unemployment rate on the expanded definition. The reason why it's not just the people that are losing jobs, but there are about 600,000 net new people that enter the adult population every year. We're still a growing country. There's no major economy that has had a 40% plus unemployment rate. So if we do go there, and my forecast is right, we'll be the first ones there. our unemployment rates are really anything you can compare it to other countries. You can go to war zones and you'll find higher unemployment. That's true in Libya and Syria, civil war zones. But, you know, even countries like Somalia have apparently got more people as a percentage employed. So if you look at the Economist magazine of all the big economies, I've never seen, and I haven't done an academic test, but I've never ever seen an unemployment in standard terms or official terms of 30% or more for any of those countries there. Not even Greece had that. So we're looking at a very different scenario, and the expanded scenario, we could go to nearly 13 million people, even if we look at the lower estimate of job losses. The other thing that we've just got to think about, why are we so unequal? Why are we so worried about this? Well, if we look at the amount of people employed as a percentage of the adult population, you go to Rwanda and they're over 80%. We in South Africa have only got 40% of people are employed. And that's a huge problem. And if you think about it, the fact is that Muslim countries and some others don't like women being employed. So this is the total population, and that's why you'll find Turkey and Egypt and Pakistan and those sort of countries around our sort of levels. But if you look at our male unemployment or male employment as a percentage, we would be probably the lowest outside of a war zone by far. And that means that if only 40% of the people get an income of your son, it means that 60% do not get an income. It means many families, many houses do not get an income. That is the reason for your inequality, more than a few rich people around. And we've been aiming our anger and everything at the wrong area. I think this is another thing. I did just a little test of what will happen here, because we've got to look at this. What happens in a place like South Africa, for example, when you have these unemployment things coming from COVID, you quite easily fall to below 35%. And at 35% of the adult population, it'll take me to a situation where our technical guy can just maybe help me move the... where we will become the first country with less than 38% of all adults in a job. As I say, that would be the first time it happened outside of a country that's not in a civil war. If we get to under 35%, which is very likely because of the sun, we would have a smaller tax base for both VAT and personal income tax. We would have, if we include the whole population, less than 1 in 4 people earning money. That is hugely problematic. It means a lot of people that don't, living, for example, in the rural areas where it's naturally higher unemployment, are going to have massive problems with hunger and everything like that. Massive political upheaval. We'll be in permanent crisis mode. The skills and the tax base will be looking to get out here because they'll feel the pinch of this. And we're more likely to make radical economic shifts. And the political leadership may not want to play the risk capital that they have on the politics. And I doubt that they will anyway. But my big point here with the employment, money cannot fix this. We've been spending money, we've been trying, we cannot fix this with money. We need to find other ways. Now, fortunately, there are some other ways that we can do it, but we need to find a way to export or import jobs. And that, I think, is very important. I think the way that the world works has changed, and it gives us a little bit of a way forward. And it's maybe something that we've got to do. But let's first have a look at what COVID did. It's taken a lot of people that were in the office, and it's put them at home or in another setting, whether it's university students even, higher education. But in the US, office workers have gone from 32 to 48%, says Forbes magazine. This is from the Bank of England, did a survey, and then Eurostats did the other work, where I combine the usually and sometimes works at home. The UK was one of the higher countries, but you can see there was an increase already a little bit before. It was always about 24%, so it went to 27%. It shot up during COVID to about 36, 37%, and it's now down to 34%. It will probably come down to about 30%. But with about 30% of people working at home in your total labor force, that's a huge amount of people. And that means that your office work is changing dramatically. And you're seeing lumber prices in the US at record highs as people renovate their homes to work from home. And that is the one clear sign that's happening. So we're looking at a new office worker. Much home work gets done at home, maybe not all, but a heck of a lot does. And does that then start the internationalization of offices and services? So do we then go from just exporting the blue-collar manufacturing work, the call center work, or outsourcing sort of work, business process outsourcing work? Do we then move to the higher echelons, the higher skills, the architects, the accountants, analysts, journalists, lead generators, IT, lab technicians? These are the things that are starting to come in. I mean, people are talking about doctors being able to operate in other countries much as they would at their own place, because 5G will enable that, because it will allow that sort of precision. You'll be able to drive little trucks around the plane perfectly. In Australia, in mining, you already got people sitting in Sydney doing mines 2,000–3,000 miles away, and controlling the trucks and everything, but the explosions are done remotely. So I think we're looking at a lot of that happening, and I think that may, for some people in South Africa, allow an opportunity to find work elsewhere. I know of at least 2 individuals that are looking at generating this sort of income, and starting now, and it is a serious option for those of us who have some form of skill. It doesn't always need to be a university skill, it can be an IT skill or a lab skill, but the problem is for the unskilled. And that's where the problem has been around the world. If you look at just the French numbers, the drop in the people that were temporarily unemployed or temporary employed was very vicious. The most vicious that we've seen since this data started in 2000. And it dropped from about 800,000 to about 450,000. Our bank survey data that I do has shown a lot of people at least not getting an income. We think some of it is delayed, but there's definitely a bias towards the temporary, the part-time, the casual worker losing their income. And we see that in the UK and Spain. So the inequality is going to become a problem here as well, I think. But for those with skills, there are other opportunities, and we've got to go and look at that. The hurt is definitely in the manual and the unskilled labor in the office, as the tea lady might not be needed, no that many cleaners, people might work from home, they already have a domestic worker or they do it themselves. So those are the sort of things. Yes, some people might pick up an extra person, a domestic worker, but they generally aren't as well paid as the cleaner in the office environment. The other problem is obviously with less people using cars and fuel. We already know the Uber drivers are complaining. The forecourt attendants are really worried about the sort of thing, because fuel sales are probably around 40% of what they were. Public transport isn't as needed anymore. These are all shifts that we will see in this process. And some of the skills that might lose out, just thinking on top of my head, might be somebody like a mechanic that's not going to have so many cars to service because people aren't buying them that quickly. There might be a shift where people used to buy their homes close to work, and now they're going to be at work in their homes. So it's going to be interesting where the retail rents are going to come from, because I don't think Sandton is going to be that full anymore. So the old sort of Sandton cities and those places are not going to see the retail sales that they saw before, apart from now that we are going to buy online, which I'll get to now. But the commercial districts in a place like Sandton, the Waterfall Estate, the Pretoria East, the centre of Cape Town, and other areas, Umhlanga and Durban, are going to hurt. Here's an interesting graph. I've only got this for the UK. I came across it from my data supplier, Macrobond. And what was interesting here is that we had such a boom in online sales. They were growing, generally speaking, better than retail sales. They were slowing down in growth. And now we've actually seen retail sales fall for a few months, and we saw online sales increase. And we don't think this is going to go back. Already in South Africa, many of the shops that never had a retail online presence, such as, for example, Checkers ShopRite, have started a 60-60, and that employs other sort of people. So maybe the Uber driver becomes a courier driver. The person working at the shop becomes a dispatcher. The warehouse becomes the hot property to have, not the retail place. So already I hear brokers telling me about they've got this wonderful place to invest, and it's a warehousing company, and they've got this and this, and these international brands are using them to warehouse their goods here and in Africa, and so on. The other thing is that we're seeing is that higher education is going to be an interesting thing. I think many academics may not feel so secure in their jobs in the coming years, because they will see a shift. I mean, I think UASA has probably turned out to have a very good model for this time period, and I think all the other universities will go somewhere there. Just two more slides. The first one is that the employment in services around the world is around 50%. It's been the one place, other than agriculture, where you haven't seen shifts across borders in jobs. Agriculture and mining, it's very difficult to shift those jobs. It is now becoming possible with remote work, obviously, but especially the employment and services is going to change, and where those jobs are and where the people live are going to change dramatically, I think. We will continue working less hours, and now we'll have even more free time because we won't have to travel to work that much. We might be bothered at home a bit, but nonetheless, I think that's from last year's work that I did. I think we're still looking at overall people having more free time, and that says to me the socialization aspect of restaurants and churches and all those things will come back more so than people think, because the new normal will be you need to interact with people if you're working that much more from home. Manufacturing employments is very difficult to grow anyway. You can see here most countries in the last while outside of Asia did not grow their manufacturing employment. And in fact, as a percentage of the population, you can see we've been on a declining trend. We were at 6.5% of our total population was in manufacturing. Now it's 2%. So very much around the world, I don't think that's somewhere where we should spend so much time and effort. We must look more at services. I think the inequality, the unskilled facing retrenchment, the higher skilled going into other services with an international angle, maybe even working from home, is going to really increase the inequality if we don't look at it carefully. And how we change that, I'm not sure. I don't have an answer. But I think the way to look at this is to see the opportunities more than the threats, because if we do that, we'll go somewhere. And I think I'm done. Thank you, Jock.
Mike, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, Mike is very factual in terms of the detail that he shares with us. Mike, there's two questions that we still have to attend to on the Q&A, and ladies and gentlemen, you're absolutely welcome to post some more questions on the Q&A. We have also enabled a raising of the hand function within the webinar. And the moment we recognize you, we will require, or we will then allow the system for you to ask your question directly to Mike. But Mike, let's just focus on the two questions that we've currently got, and both are from Helmo. I guess the first question is more of a comment. The Japanese Prime Minister Abe resigned today due to ill health. Do you expect our Deputy President to resign as well, as he's been absent from Parliament due to ill health issues? So,
Helmo, you decide.
So, Helmo has also requested, Mike, for you to attend to the following one. How does the move from work to work from home impact on the city CBD, as coffee shops, print shops, restaurants are dependent on office workers for their existence?
Well, it's a very good question, Helmo. That is one thing I think is going to certainly happen. I think we saw the Joburg CBD being emptied because of the crime wave, and even after the crime wave, the people are stuck in people's minds. And I think it's just sort of come right. Now, if that happens again, that a lot of those people that have gone there are working from home, then again, you could have that drop. But where I think it's really going to hurt is in the top end, where the people are more likely to work from home. In a place like Sandton, where you have lots of lawyers' offices, lots of investment banks, lots of brokers, even the research houses in Ilovo and places like that are going to come under tremendous pressure, Rosebank and so on. And I think those things are going to move more to where we are staying now, in the suburbs, in the townships, wherever we are. And I think people are going to use a lot less of that sort of centralization places. And I think the distribution model for retail is changing, not just because of online, but I think the growth in stores in the suburbs is now going to be the main thing. And once you've got those stores there, then just from a transport side of it, you can use that as, which is what Checkers 6060 is doing, as like your warehouse. So you have people running up and down the normal shop, but you filling up for people that aren't coming into the shop, and then you taking it on a motorbike to a person's house. So then a motorbike, less transport costs, but you're taking big items or lots of items in a truck to that place. So your distribution model will change from one that was very centralized, going out to spokes, to where those actual spokes are going to grow their own spokes, if you wish. And I think the way that the city centers, the commercial districts specifically, will look in 5 years' time will be very different. I wouldn't want to have a property in Sandton or even maybe Waterfall. I think I was called to a business meeting in the Mall of Africa, and I've never seen a mall that empty. It was frightening. This was at level 3 or something a few weeks ago, and I think Tasha's was open, and they had quite a couple of tables, let's say 10 tables, that had people. Most of the other restaurants had 1 or 2 tables or none. Most of the clothing stores had nobody in. All the high-end stores, nothing. Everybody was gone. It was towards the end of last month. It was incredibly quiet. We're seeing that. Compare that to a bit more nearer the suburbs base, it looks much closer to normal there. And also what we're picking up is with the extra SASSA payments, the spending in the rural areas is definitely picked up, because that's where a lot of the money has gone to. And that's what the distribution of that money is showing us. And the card transactions and so on are very often on the outlying areas are holding up better, and in fact up compared to the geographical city center areas. So it's already taking place. I don't know 100% how it's going to change, but obviously there's a big change coming on. There's no doubt, and it is with us right now. I wouldn't want to have a big inner city building, and I wouldn't want to have a big inner commercial high-end A-grade office. A-grade office might have to be rethought.
Mike, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the questions that are coming through on our Q&A platform. Mike, in terms of the very high levels of unemployment, Tricia is asking, what do you foresee is the future of our SOEs?
We're in a terrible position with our SOEs. There's no money for SAA. It's been a very big question, and it's used so much money. And now we heard from our finance minister that the amount spent over about 10 years is roughly 190 billion. Now, to put that into perspective, I think if you go to 2014 or whatever, maybe Darby will know better, but that would have been your whole health budget or your whole education budget, two of the bigger items in our budget. That's what we spent on SOEs. That money is no longer there. So a lot of the SOEs, even those that are not looking like strugglers now, remember Gautrain gets a lot of money from government. PRASA gets a lot of money from government. All of them will have problems, and that will have a knock-on effect into, say, Transnet, who are getting paid something to keep up the rail lines from PRASA. So the Eskom is the one that you have to keep afloat because no modern economy works without electricity. There's just no way it can. So I think we're going to see a very changed economy. We're going to have to make changes. Maybe it's time that the privatization happens, or at least the opening up. So in other words, Transnet becomes a rail infrastructure company, and the other part becomes Transnet Rail, which then competes with Imperial Rail and Bala World Rail on the rail side. And the same would then apply in the harbours. The same may even have to apply in the airports. So I understand AXA has also not had its income that it thought it would have. Places like Denel are in serious trouble. They had export orders and our government wasn't able to deliver the guarantees. And if you don't do that, then you leave them in the lurch. So I think we're going to see a split up of all these entities into much smaller entities where they can be perhaps sold off. But we won't have the money for that. Not with these sort of budget numbers. There's no way.
Mike, thank you. Professor Karel van Aert, nice to see you on board as well. Mike, he's got a question. Firstly, a comment. You've painted a very bleak but realistic picture, Mike. However, any crisis gives rise to new opportunities as people learn to do things in a new way and develop new products and services to serve new needs. There could also be more realistic wage demands, lower inflation, better economic policies, and etc. Do you foresee such positives coming from this crisis?
Yes, eventually we will have to. I don't think there's any doubt about that, Carl. I really think, you know, where you come from a UNISA side of things, they've already got part of that solution. And with the wiring up and also airwaves becoming much more able to handle video back and forth on the 5G and the 4G and all that, and it's becoming cheaper, I think I see a student at UNISA having as much classes online and interaction with fellow students electronically. I look at my son and they've all got this thing called Discord where they talk to each other the whole time. They laugh and joke, and it's already something that they're doing. And it's very natural if you're in that environment. So that's the way that a lot of kids still had interaction with other kids where they weren't allowed to go and play in this crisis. So I think there are positives that will come out of this. I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again. You need to now use leadership, and that means using political capital. That's saying to people, don't be fearful, let's get out there, let's do this. Wait a while, we are not going to be able to afford the amount of money we're spending on the civil service. Let's have a look at how we can restructure this whole process. Let's have a talk, let's have an honest conversation. And those are the sort of things that we have. It's not an easy way. We also have to look at things like the investment, the Regulation 28 needs to not change, for example, but it needs to be given more freedom. And once that, you'll find money will flow to the more efficient parts of the economy and we will find better growth factors in the economy. If we open up just small things, I'm involved on the transport side, you know, if we get our 24-hour borders, it will bring down the cost of transporting some of our export goods out of this country and imports in. It'll lower the cost base for places like Zimbabwe, Zambia, and the whole region could benefit. So there are things that we can do if we use the rail, the ports, the airports, all those sort of things, I think. And I also think it's time that we start looking at, we did very well on the tourist side for a far-off destination. 2.7% of our income came from tourism, overseas tourism, of GDP. That was bigger than most other far-off destinations like New Zealand and Australia. So I think we did very well, but we could do better if we just relax the visa requirements for South Africa, first of all, but make the SACU countries one, make Namibia, Botswana. We've already got a tariff barrier together. Let's make it so that all those flights are internal domestic flights. Don't see them as a cash cow to make a few $100 for some customs official. Make it about efficiency. So some things can be done without too much political capital, but I think the real stuff you will need a lot of political capital to do.
Mike, I'm going to combine two questions, if the participants would allow me. Both Asif and Gideon. Asif has asked, can South Africa afford any more load shedding and power cuts? And do you support more public-private partnerships in infrastructure in general to grow our economy and create jobs? I'm going to link Gideon du Plessis. Gideon, nice to see you on board. His question with regards to what will the consequences be to companies not spending money on capital and development projects at the moment. So I want to link the two of them because I think they tie together.
They are indeed in a way tied together. The first thing is public-private partnerships in the first place have to be exactly able to meet standards that a private sector would have for returns, but for the public sector would put in the money to help those returns, but to not put in all the money, but to put in to provide for the services. Because public sector should be providing everyday services to you. They should be providing a road, water, electricity, whatever. Electricity is a bit of a strange one. You can break that up. In most countries in the world today, electricity is provided by private power producers. Similar sort of thoughts are starting to cross my mind about water, but roads, yes, there are toll roads, but in most places you can't put a toll road in every suburb or something like that and be worthwhile. So ultimately we're going to look at a very different thing. And the part of it is, Steve, with the investments, is that there are new ways. So you will find that cars all have tracking devices. Those tracking devices can tell people where you are the whole time. So you don't even need a GFIM. You can get people to pay for their usage without involving even petrol. And that's going to be important for the future, I think, that we look at the models into the future in that sense. Back to a more, that was a practical example, but I think what I need to do here is to say, in South Africa, why is fixed investment not happening? From the government side, they've been cutting back on the fixed investment because they've been doing consumption expenditure. That has to change. That has to change. It has nothing to do other than political decisions. The second thing is the private sector has been investing, but not enough. But they have not had the return on investment. So for a while, our private sector's investments were around 6% and the bank rate was, let's say, 7%. So it made more sense to keep your money in the bank because you got a better return and you had less risk. Now that situation is changing because you've dropped the interest rates dramatically. The problem is the fear factor is now here. So we have to, from the private sector side, but also from government and everybody else, we have to start addressing the fear factor after this crisis. That's the first thing, because I think the whole world, all our leaders messed up terribly. There is not just one disease in the world. To put things into perspective, every day 161,000 people die of a heart attack. And we've got 800,000 people that have died. That's 5 days worth of heart attacks over 8 months. Yes, it is a terrible disease. I'm not making light of it. I'm just saying we found other ways to handle all these other things. A lockdown all over the world was not necessary. We didn't have to follow the Chinese example, and now the Chinese have got no lockdown for a long period of time, and countries like South Africa and Peru, for example, and Brazil have been locked down far longer than China and will feel far bigger impacts from that. So we have to work at combating the COVID fears. We have to work at reducing the risk in South Africa by saying we will take on certain things. We will have to also insure land. We will have to insure property. This is not the time to change pension fund laws. All these sort of things, we've got to come forth and say, we are going to produce a lot of certainty. Because once we've got that and the companies come back and the fear goes away a bit, the investment boom can start. And then you can encourage it with a bit of tax reductions, all those sort of extras. And once you do that, we know the biggest link to employment in South Africa and in most countries around the world is fixed investment. Maybe not fixed investment in aeroplanes, but certainly fixed investment in road, in water, in infrastructure products, in factories, in fitting out factories, in putting together warehouses. All those sort of things are really very big job creators. If you just think of a house, once you build a house, it's not just the building of the house and the people involved there, but once the people move in, you're using a moving company, you're going to buy new curtains, you're going to buy new furniture, you're going to buy cleaning equipment every day, you're going to use electricity, all those sort of things. You're going to get an electrician in, a plumber in over time, a gardener maybe, a domestic worker. All those things roll up and they create those jobs. Those jobs won't exist if there wasn't a house to clean or to fix or to hang curtains in. So the fixed infrastructure, and this is now simple from a very low type of thing. I mean, people probably say it's a wrong example, but I'm just using that example. Because if you think again on the business side, you know, once a business has got a premises and it's got factory machinery and it's got computers and it then needs the people to operate it. Those are the sort of things, that's why infrastructure is very, very important, Gideon. I don't have any doubt that we need to address that. And part of that is, the answer is, if government becomes more believable and if government chooses the side of those that see a future and opportunity in the country, i.e. the business people investing, and gives them more certainty, I think that will change a lot. And we also have to look at harshly at other laws that we have. We're one of the only countries in the world with localization laws. Ours are called BEE. In Malaysia, they dropped them. 3-4 years after they dropped them, their negative investment went positive. Their negative net foreign investment went positive. If us and Namibia and Zimbabwe and other countries around us do the same, we will see that our region isn't the most avoided region in foreign fixed investment. And then we can bring our unemployment rate down. Once we do that, we bring down inequality, income inequality, certainly.
Mike, thank you for that. Johan van Tonder, thank you so much for your comment. Just a follow-on question from Helmo, Mike, is with regards to people working from home and the CBDs that might run empty. So Helmo's follow-up question was, so does this mean that the township economy gets a big boost?
I think in certain cases, yes. The problem is that if you're looking at a small property, it becomes maybe a bit difficult doing everything from home, and depends on how many people there are. But we know from the household surveys in South Africa that a large part of our population, literally over 50%, live either on their own or with just one other person. Assuming that one other person goes out of the house most of the time, then you can work from home in a township environment as well. It is, however, much more difficult working from home in, say, a sort of RDP matchbox style house when you've got 4 or 5 people living there. that is going to not be conducive to working from home. But I do think that some things will happen, and I think also entrepreneurs will come forward where they will take, like the We Work principle for offices will start happening. Already where I am, we're sharing, 3 companies are sharing an office, not one office, but a few offices and a passage and so on. And I think we're about to see more of that. I've seen a lot of other good ideas on this, and I think it can travel. So what I'm saying is, once you have people are renting out, for example, RDP houses for spaza shops, you might find people renting out RDP houses for offices. Once the infrastructure, as in fiber lines or 5G or 4G are in place, then you can do that. And it would probably mean that that person doesn't have to travel that far most of the time. And it probably, we're finding as well that the usual, not only, but usually work from home is a smaller number than sometimes. And sometimes can be 3 days a week. Usual is 4 or 5 days a week. So I think we're going to see a bit of that. And that also saves that person money, so they have more money to spend. And a lot of that spending will then take place in a township environment, be it paying the rent to the RDP owner of the RDP house, or be it that there's not going to travel to work in a car, but go and have a meal at the local tavern.
Mike, thank you. And then I'm going to just answer to say, don't waste a crisis.
Okay, I'll try not to waste the crisis.
Professor Karel, I'm going to combine both your 2 final questions into one. Mike, and Prof. Karel says there's a lot of talk of the new normal post-COVID. What would this new normal look like with respect to the South African economy and the labour market? He goes on further to say, and what are those urgent items that we need to address in terms of labour market flexibility and addressing the structural imbalances in our economy? From the time I was at the established National Manpower Commission in the 1980s. So in other words, that's how far back that discussion has started. The need for this is still being emphasized to ensure higher levels of GDP and job growth. Do you believe that this will ever be addressed?
It's a very difficult one, Carl. You know that better than I do. If I look at the history of labour relations in South Africa, I go back to 1979 to the Vian Commission, and we go and look, and we've done that work here with the UASA employment report, at how some sectors have really ratcheted up the bottom end of the market, employment payments. So you found that, for example, a driver would be paid on average inflation +1 or whatever. I'm talking about a truck driver or maybe a bus driver. But you found that the cleaner was getting increases of inflation +4 or 5%, and not over a period of 1 year, but over a period of 30 or 40 years. That has changed the labour market in South Africa tremendously, where in certain cases it is now quite expensive to employ unskilled labour, and it's that part of the labour force that has got difficulty. But yet we still hear of the poor people and the wage gap and everything. Yes, that's very true that there is a wage gap, but in many cases the wage gap is the wrong way round in a way, because in a perfect world, and let's not talk about the executives here, that's a different matter altogether. Let's talk, in a perfect world, a skilled worker would be also having quite a tremendous increase in pay. And we know, for example, from the mines, that the guys with skills did get increases, but nowhere close, and I'm talking about technical skills, nowhere close to the guys at the bottom of the mine. I'm not talking about the underground miner necessarily, but the unskilled part. And this has been going on. We took coal mines and gold mines back to the mid-90s. We took other places some. So we need to have a look at how all those sort of things work So that's where we have to free it up. We have to get rid of these very tough agreements that people get into over time. We have to at least then, for a while, maybe give increases below the rate of inflation. The same will probably happen with the government employees, because we can't afford a 15% of GDP wage bill, which will now become more due to our GDP dropping. We will have to re-look at how that's going to work, because we don't have the tax income from the rest of the economy to bear that out. So we have to lower sometimes the cost of the labor, not directly lower it as in pay cuts, you do it over time. The second thing is we've got to look at the rules of that labor, and you know that as well as I do, and there are many rules. The fact is, I've been in this game also a long time, and I think if I can sum it up in one sentence, it's not one rule. It's the constant making of new rules and new things that are making it very difficult to create jobs. So if we just change our mindset and we say, yes, we want fair labor practices, yes, we want health and safety practices that are good, yes, we don't want violence at work, let's then take the next step and say, what can we do away with if we change, if we want to add more rules, we have to take something away. But we put down 3 or 4 sets of rules that don't change. There's also a need for certainty for people to have, because people don't want to lose their jobs overnight, because it just also has impacts on the economy. They have loans, they have whatever. So you want to do that. But you want to sort of have a thing where you could have a discussion with people and say, I want to employ all of you, but I can't. And can we have a pay cut? Maybe not directly a pay cut, but no increases for 2 years. It might be tough on those employees, but it'll be tougher if we lose the jobs. So we've got to work out where we can do these things. I don't have all the answers. Each situation is probably unique. And then the other thing is we've got to really do something, and nobody's asked that question, but I'll just want to, we've got to do something about the corruption on top of our country. The fact of the matter is the policeman asking for a bribe doesn't think he's doing anything wrong, because he sees the guy on top having taken bribes. And we've seen from the Zondo Commission, and we've known for a long time from the investigative journalists. We've known since the arms deal, Serafina. We've been through this corruption. It's been around even in the National Party times. We need to put some serious amount of people into jail. It needs to be seen, because if we don't address the corruption part, it becomes a problem. Because you get the guy from the Department of Labor that comes to a guy and says, I don't think all these things are, and so on. And this guy just says, but you know, I've only got 20 people. I'm just trying to make rooms. No, what do you mean? And he says, no, I'll listen, but if you pay me 1,500 Rand, I'll go away. If we can get rid of some of that, it will also help a lot. That's really, I think, another aspect that we've got to look at.
Mike, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we then come to the last and the final question that we will have time for, unfortunately, today. So, Elmo, your final question, I have to stay over. I'll ask Mike to call you. But Rihanna de Lange, also good to see you here. Mike, advice for matriculants or grade 11s who are deciding on a career path, field of study now. Very pertinent and very interesting.
Very interesting. I think I would say with the ability to work far and assuming the child wants to study further, I think a numbers degree, be it accounting, physics, economics, statistics, is very important. Medical will always be needed because the world is aging. We did that last year. As the world ages, we need more medicine. Certainly, I think those are the things. I think the more free time we have, the more problems we find in our mind. So, you know, those are also things. The sort of generalized degrees and that is really out. It's Those people are not always finding jobs, end up at call centers. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people with a BCom degree in call centers, I found. That's just anecdotal. Then I think the other thing that's undervalued is the technical side. And maybe not everyone, but there's certainly technical things. Maybe not the mechanic now because we're going to drive less, but the plumber is going to be still needed. The high-end technical specialist that does certain specialities like the welding that we had to import for the ESCOM thing. That's already a worldwide thing where people go, and the same happens with oil platforms, and it'll happen with solar energy, and it'll happen with all those sort of things. So the person that can deal with electricity from solar and can do that properly, maybe, you know, electric cars will come in, and so then have a look at those sort of technical angles where things are happening in a thing. I would say that's my thing. And again, I think personalized services will come back in a strange way, maybe, but they will come back, because if we're working from home, we're going to be a bit lonely. So going to the hairdresser, going to a restaurant with a good chef, and the way that a restaurant looks, maybe, so the designer type person, all those sort of things are going to play a role in our future. And then I think, you know, we keep underestimating it, but one of the places that's been creating jobs in South Africa is probably the religious movements. You know, everybody's opening their own church or something like that. So I'm not saying open and study religion, don't get me wrong here, but I'm saying that shows you that there's a need, and if somebody's going to study something that's going to involve human-to-human interface, I think that will be good. I think the world will never lock down again. The French president has now said that they won't lock down again. The Italians have said that they won't lock down again. It was a huge mistake. Finland was first to say it was, Norway's health minister lady said it was a mistake to lock down. They've got lots of mental problems. I hear from the psychiatrists in town are full, and the chemists have never sold as many anti-anxiety and antidepressants as they're doing now. They're actually literally running out of them. Don't get worried, they'll come. But nonetheless, I think that's really a long story, but it is my opinion that we are social animals, and we will need that. And I don't think Zoom will stay. But Zoom will have added things where I will see you more, and when you pop up with a question, your face pops up and we interact more. But then that's not enough. We will still go to the pub, to the church, to the gym for that. So I think something in that line is also worthwhile studying. I'm not sure what all the things are called, Rihanna, but I think on the higher end, the numbers type of thing is very important. Maybe even philosophy is important. But sort of the general degrees, I think, are really a dime a dozen. We always used to make a joke until I met somebody with an MBA. And what do you say to someone with an MBA in America? Well, can I have that with chips, please? And it's a problem. So you've got to be, the world is moving into, you've got to be a bit of a generalist, first of all, and then you become a specialist. And I think that's what the world is moving into. And it's not just universities, let me make that clear. In England, they have 50% of the kids are now going to university, and it's far too much. They're discovering that they can't get jobs for all of them. So we still need the sergeant majors of this economy, the technicians, the hairdressers, the waiters, the chefs we'll need always.
Mike, we've come to the end of the session today. Thank you so much. The 19th one done and dusted. As always, very insightful and very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, just in terms of some of the detail at the back, all of you will receive within the next few hours a copy of the presentation, as well as a preset that we've drafted to just outline the challenges that Mike has presented today. Just allow me from UASA and our president just to thank everybody for your time today. Thank you for your input. Thank you for the interesting questions that you've posed. If I may, in terms of a final comment or a statement, we have seen job summits, we have seen investment summits, we have seen summits by all the different names. By just rewarming them every time when there's a crisis will not solve challenges. We need to have and adopt a new paradigm. Where is that new solution, lasting, sustainable solution, in terms of not just jobs, but in terms of our economy? I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you well in the afternoon. Take care, stay safe, and stay COVID negative. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.